Ryobi now makes floor-to-ceiling cleaning easier than ever with cordless cleaning tools powered by 18-volt ONE+ batteries. Whether it's a quick tidy-up or deep cleaning, our powerful and versatile tools make cleaning a breeze. Spend less time cleaning and more time enjoying your pristine home. And because one battery powers over 300 products, you have the power to do more. Visit ryobitools.com to learn more. Sold exclusively at the Home Depot.
This is VSiN's College Football Betting Podcast.
Welcome in, everyone. Another edition of the VSiN College Football Betting Podcast. I am your host, Tim Murray. By the way, I went back and listened to our last podcast. Never mentioned my name, so probably should do that moving forward. At one Tim Murray is where you can find me on Twitter. And I'll keep reminding you that we will have a Power 5 conference breakdown each week through the month of June, maybe bleeds over into July. But last week, we broke down the Big Ten with Adam Rittenberg. We will get to the SEC. We will get to the ACC. We will get to the Pac-12 as these weeks go on here in June. But today, very excited for our next guest. He is phenomenal when it comes to breaking down college football, specifically the Big 12. And that is Parker Fleming. You know the Twitter handle at StatsOWar. And he does work with our guy Eric Eager over at Sumer Sports, Bet US College Football later on in the summer and then all throughout the year. So a full breakdown of the Big 12, some best bets, some intriguing ways to attack this Big 12 conference, which will be a conference of 14 this year because this is the final year of Oklahoma and Texas. Interestingly enough, both of those teams are the favorites to win the conference in their final year, including Texas, who's getting a whole lot of love. We had Paul Stone on, Brad Powers, both very high on Texas heading into 2023. I think Colin Wilson too. There's a lot of buzz. Now they've had that for quite some time, but it seems like this year, and we'll get into it with Parker, it could be legitimate. So once again, please rate, review, and subscribe. Reminder, my goal this entire offseason, we will have a podcast for you, at least one each and every week throughout the summer months. If you can't get to them, well, just let them pile up and then listen to them as the year goes on. And then I'll continue to reiterate this as well. Once we start kind of getting after it for the VSiN College Football Betting Podcast, you will get the likes of Wes Reynolds, Matt Humans, Adam Burke. We're planning on running it back like we did last year, multiple episodes each and every week. So you will hear those familiar voices very soon here on the VSiN College Football Betting Podcast. But today, it is Parker Fleming at StatsOWar on Twitter talking Big 12. And as promised, Parker Fleming, you probably know the Twitter handle by now, but I'll give it to you anyways. At StatsOWar, that's the letter O and WAR, does some fine work with my good friend Eric Eager over at Sumer Sports. Make sure to check out the Sumer Sports Show Monday and Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern. And then once the season gets closer, he will ramp things back up with Bet US College Football. Parker, appreciate you jumping on. So many different ways to go, but I've been trying to do conference specific, and I know the Big 12 is something you cover very, very closely. So before we dive into each and every team, I just want to look at, the futures market right now. Handful of books already have Big 12 odds out there, and I'll run through the best odds available. So Texas, you can find at DraftKings at plus 120. Circa has it as plus 105. This is to win the Big 12 championship. Oklahoma plus 350 at DraftKings. Kansas State plus 675 at Circa. Texas Tech 14-1. TCU and Baylor both sitting at 16-1. I could go further. There are some long shots, but let's start with Texas. I've had some really sharp college football minds come on and basically say the same thing, Parker, which is Texas is the best team, but we've said that before, but they're the best team. So where are you right now on Texas as they enter the 2023 season?
Yeah, so I will say that I think at some point we have to stop being afraid of the meme, and we have to acknowledge that like Texas has resources that almost no one else has. They went through a period of turnover after Mac Brown that was a little tough, but they still recruited elite talent, and they are recruiting elite talent. And I think that they're at a point where they should be the clear favorite to win the league. They are, and I think that to the point of like if they're not in Arlington this fall, then we got to talk about what the program's doing entirely because just want to just again a huge talent advantage on everyone on their schedule except Alabama, and even then the talent gap is not monstrous between Texas and Alabama there. They've got a returning quarterback who can come back, and they're going to bring back, I believe, all of their offensive line. They are, or at least maybe four. I don't know if that fifth position is going to change. And so a lot of continuity there. Their defensive pipeline, even though they lost a couple guys, is really, really solid. And I think people forget that, like on the same day of fall practice last year, Texas lost Isaiah Nayer and Junior Angelau, the guard, and that was a pretty big loss. Like they still had a fine season, even without that. Those key personnel, and even as teams could target Xavier Worthy and then kind of dare Texas to do something else. I think they've made a couple staff changes this offseason to try and figure out how to get the offense to move a little more fluidly. I think Quinn Ewers probably spent more time with just chucking a ball into a trash can from different points across the field than anybody else in America, and just got some of those reps in to make sure he was finely tuned on those certain couple routes that he struggled with last year. I know that it's a meme to say Texas is back, but like I think they're the clear favorite to win this league.
Yeah, I was. It was pretty eye-opening to me when I was reading through the Phil Steele preview here, and he had across the board every position. Parker, Texas was number one in the Big 12. I mean, I can't recall that ever happening, and I'm sure it has at some point. But like Alabama, Georgia. I mean, that at least something's going to be number two or number three. I mean, they are number one in the Big 12 across the board. So we look at the schedule. They go to Baylor. Obviously, they go to Alabama, as you alluded to. September 9th, that's going to be a primetime game. They're about a touchdown underdog. That could be a potential spot to look to grab the dog, as certainly Alabama has some questions at the quarterback position. At Baylor, neutral against Oklahoma, bye week at Houston, at TCU, at Iowa State, and then they wrap up the season a Friday nighter in Austin against Texas Tech. So their win total's 9.5. And, once again, this is a team that, won 8 games last year, Parker, and as well as anybody, have continued to underachieve year after year. They haven't won this conference since 2009, but you look at that schedule, and as of right now, they will not be an underdog in any game outside of Alabama, and it sounds like you kind of give them a puncher's shot there. So is over 9.5 a potential look for you when you look at Texas?
I think I'm much more interested in a Big 12 conference championship flyer for Texas than I am the over 9.5, just because if you look at the way the schedule breaks, the bye works out pretty okay, right? What is that? The
October 14th is their week off.
14th, right? So you play Oklahoma, Houston should be no problem, and then you get a bye week, a week of practice versus a BYU team that's just not going to be very good before you do the Kansas State TCU back to back, which is clearly the hardest part of the schedule. I think the one thing that makes me wary about a 9.5 ticket is kind of the road breaks. So Texas had some trouble at TCU historically. They do have to go to Waco. But then you look at that game, that Friday night versus Texas Tech, and if there was anything in the world that could manifest college football weirdness, it would be either Texas Tech being who a lot of people are projecting them to be and winning that game with potential Big 12 title ramifications, or potentially, a rematch between Texas and Texas Tech in the Big 12 title right after that. So really interesting game to kind of circle there. I think if that game was earlier in the season, Texas would feel a lot better about it. But, I can look at that. I can look at some of the away games with the almost, I don't want to say guaranteed because nothing's guaranteed, but with the likely loss against Alabama and the fact that they don't have an FCS team on the schedule, you've got to look at kind of the breaks and all of that. So I'm not comfortable with an over 9.5 just because that Big 12 championship ticket does give them a little bit of flexibility to stumble and still maintain, still get in that championship game and then win.
Yeah, there's no doubt, and we've seen action come in on them to win the Big 12. That has gotten scooped up, and look, this is my own opinion. But I believe that Circa Sports is the sharpest college football market out there. And I always think it's kind of interesting when you see them at plus 105 and other shops a little higher, which kind of gives me the hint, hey, they're pretty darn high on this Texas team. So, when you could get a better number elsewhere, sometimes, not always, but sometimes, to me, that's kind of an indication of where at least their mind is regarding Texas. So yeah, interesting look there at plus 120 at DraftKings, as we always say, and especially in the futures market, please do shop around and look around for better prices. And Parker, you're a guy, obviously, people know your Twitter and the way that you go about handicapping games, very analytically based. Are you going to put into any, I don't know if stock's the right word, but we know this is the last year for Texas and Oklahoma in this conference. And they, no matter what, they always get the best shot from every team in this conference. But it feels like they might even get a little extra oomph this year from their opponents. So could that weigh in at all to the way you look at this season?
Yeah, so I think that I try to reduce some. I try to resist some temptation in that because I did not start out as a handicapper. I really almost didn't get to like full-time betting or anything pretty intense. Was really starting from like I'm just interested in a model that helps me understand games, and turns out, hey, it's a pretty good way to look at games and gives me an edge in some situations. But there are times where I do, like on the Bet US show, say like, I don't trust this number. I think this is different. And so I think that my hope with that kind of factor, right, is that it's something like something that comes out in the wash of the numbers. If Texas is getting everybody's best shot, then what we're going to see is their efficiency that I adjust against Baylor and against Kansas is going to be relatively lower than what those other opponents have, what Kansas has given up to everyone else, right? Or what Kansas has done against everyone else. And so in that way, through those opponent adjustments, then what I'm saying is I'm kind of penalizing Texas for getting everybody's best shot, which may be a little confusing about the actual quality of the team, right? But like, for Texas and Oklahoma both, what you're seeing is the way the games are playing out. I'm gonna give them a penalty. So if that were the case, and that really was what was happening from like an empirical sense, and of course there's just immense vibes in college football that we can't even imagine to capture with a number. But in an empirical sense, if that's what we're seeing, that everyone's having kind of their best game or outperforming against Texas, my model's going to adapt to that, right? It's going to bring them down and say, okay, well, I'm actually expecting them to play a little worse against these worse teams. And it'll catch up. So, ex ante, I'm not going to go in and like check mark like with the actual numbers, but like looking at picks I'm thinking about for the show, I have that Texas Tech game circled. I'm watching that TCU game on November 11th to see what I think about Iowa State, a team that Texas has struggled with, but a team that hasn't been able to put away Texas in a couple of those meetings. So I think there's definitely some storylines of where I kind of want to tinker after I see the number, but in terms of the actual number, that effect will be baked in as we see the results earlier on.
Let's get to Oklahoma. They also have a win total of 9.5. Juice kind of varies. I think it's a little bit more towards the under there. They're plus 350 to win the conference at DraftKings. 6-6 last year in the regular season. Kind of a disastrous Big 12 season there where they got annihilated by TCU and Texas in back-to-back games. They beat Kansas rather handily, but down the stretch they lost that overtime game to Texas Tech. They lost on the road to West Virginia. So certainly an up and down year one for Brent Venables. No Alabama on their non-con. Their non-con is Arkansas State, SMU, and then at Tulsa before they start up the conference portion of their play at Cincinnati, a team that we'll get to, but their win total is sitting at 5.5. So Oklahoma, Dylan Gabriel is back. Not nearly as many starters returning as Texas. 16 starters returning for Texas, 13 it looks like for Oklahoma. But you look at this Oklahoma team, and I think the initial inclination would be, 9.5. They went 6-6 last year. Absolute fade. I haven't gotten to the window in Oklahoma yet, Parker, but there's some curiosity there entering year two with Brent Venables, and like many teams we've seen, they got pretty busy. Brought in McCullough from Indiana, edge rusher, who could be a really special player there. So what do you make of Oklahoma here in year two of Brent Venables?
I think it can be true that Oklahoma is not existentially doomed for the future, and true that Oklahoma is in a really tough spot right now. I think that the Brent Venables consideration was that he was going to come into a really nice situation, slowly mold it to his image, and kind of keep this thing humming. And frankly, Lincoln Riley raided the pantry. And I don't want that to be a value statement on whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, but saying like, in terms of their quarterback pipeline and in terms of what he was doing kind of in that recruiting class, knowing that he was probably going to leave. Oklahoma just hit a couple speed bumps. Their quarterback room super thin. I think that was the question last year that, Oklahoma fans loved when I asked. But like, if Dylan Gabriel got hurt, what was the floor of this team? And it turns out it was 6-6. It was really, really bad. But their underlying metrics weren't terrible. I put some garbage time filters on and try to not penalize the team for losing 49-0. Make sure I'm only counting football that's really going to be predictive of the future. They were 38th in EPA per play margin, so not awful when you opponent adjust that on offense. Excuse me. But then that defense was 91st. That defense needs a lot of work. And what's crazy is they keep putting out NFL guys on defense, but the unit has not been good. So that's Venables' specialty. I don't expect them to be the 6-6 range. I think that their quarterback room is a little bit better situation. They won't have Davis Beville running the Wildcat if Dylan Gabriel gets hurt. So that issue, that kind of red flag of the thinness of the quarterback room has gone away from me. What I want to know is when Gabriel is healthy, can they score enough to give this defense time to kind of merge into itself? And you look at a game, you circle a game like SMU on September 9th, and you think they can kind of sling it. That's pretty early in the season. Is Oklahoma's defense going to be tight enough to not let that get away from them? They do get a nice ramp up of Cincinnati and an Iowa State team that shouldn't be great before that matchup into Texas. And then the second half of the schedule is probably one of the weaker ones of anyone. So they could get this thing humming and go. But I don't think we're in a position for Oklahoma to return to the absurd dominance of what they were. And I think if you had to ask me about Oklahoma's prospects in the SEC versus Texas's, I'd say that Texas is in a much better situation right now, just given what's gone on with them. So, I think Oklahoma should be better, and not just because they'll be healthier, but I do wonder how quickly this defense is going to coalesce. Is it going to be able to become a unit that's coherent enough to take care of the Cincinnati, Iowa State, UCF, Kansas kind of teams that they should beat, and keep them in contention for the Big 12?
So last year we saw Kansas State rack up 10 wins, head to the Sugar Bowl, and they had a lead on Alabama before ultimately seeing that one go away rather quickly. But, we know the pieces that they lost, right? Deuce Vaughn is gone. He felt like he did a little bit of everything for that offense. Will Howard is back, which is certainly a positive for Chris Kleiman's squad here. So when you look at Kansas State, odds-wise, and that's just kind of the way I'm going here, and we haven't gotten to TCU yet, who, of course, won the conference last year. Odds-wise, they have the third shortest odds to win this conference, sitting at plus 675 at Circa. Win total, 8.5 at DraftKings, 8 at Circa, Parker. Kansas State's a team under Chris Kleiman who, it's one of those teams where, it's cliche, but you kind of always say they always seem to be better than the sum of their parts, but they lost, like I mentioned, some big name players. The edge rusher went to Kansas City at the end of the first round. So they lost some pieces there. What do you expect to see from the Wildcats here in this season?
Yeah, it's been really fun to watch Will Howard kind of go from an afterthought to a fill-in to the guy there. I thought they'd bring in Adrian Martinez. I don't think anyone expected Will Howard to start what is that, the last five games for them, I think, and put up a pretty good performance. Almost 60% completion on an average depth of target of over 10 yards. Like, he was throwing the ball downfield and getting it close enough for those guys. I think that if they're going to design an offense for him, he could potentially be a little bit more of a threat there. In terms of repeating, I think it's really important, as conference champions, I think it's really important to look at two things for Kansas State. First off, I think this is the first year where their win total has not been grossly off. I think in 2021, it was like 4.5, and this year it was 5.5. I mean, I've been making money on betting Kansas State overs for years now, because I think they just don't have a good idea under Kleiman. This is the first one where it feels like they do have a pretty good sense of the step that they're going to take, right? And so this, some places I've seen like 8.5, some places 8. It's a little bit worrisome. That Missouri game, I think, is a harder non-con game than a lot of people think in terms of over-unders and totals there. And they get a couple tricky games at Texas Tech, at Texas, at Kansas that they're going to have to navigate. And the problem is they lost their best players. That doesn't mean they're going to necessarily be a worse team, but like you don't lose Deuce Vaughn and not lose something on the offense. And so they're definitely going to have to win differently. You also look at the margins of their schedule in 2023, how close they were with a lot of those one-score games that could have gone either way. And generally, a lot of one-score games and a lot of returning production is really, really hard to, it makes me a little bit nervous, right? Because it's like, you're close margins for what you had last year, and you're going to have to find some new guys. They're 76th in returning production this year. So what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 one-score games last year, and they went 5-1 of those. Beat everybody but Texas. So again, that makes me a little bit nervous just about their development and their progression and where they'll take the next step. And by no means would like an 8 or 9 win season for Kansas State be a failure. I mean, I think a 9-win season would be incredible in the regular season. But if they hit that like 7-8 wins, that's kind of the cost of doing business in the Big 12, where you peak and then have to retool a little bit. I don't see them as otherworldly dynastic at this moment. So I'd be a little bit scared about an over at 8.5. And I don't think that they're a dark horse for the conference in the same way that they were last season.
Well, a team, you mentioned dark horse, and a team that has been talked as maybe a little bit of a dark horse is Texas Tech. We talked about them and that finale that they'll have to wrap up the regular season at Texas. They do get TCU on a Thursday night off a bye, so you like that spot situationally and rest-wise. No Oklahoma on the schedule. Win total 7 at Circa, 7.5 at DraftKings. They open up with a very unique non-conference game at Wyoming, where they're a 2-touchdown favorite. And then they get Oregon to come to their house, the Tyler Shuck Revenge Bowl in week 2, where we've actually talked about that game quite a bit here on this podcast, where I've joked, I really want a close game in week 1 so that the market thinks Texas Tech stinks, and then we could come in on the Red Raiders there in I believe, a primetime spot against Oregon there. So Texas Tech, ending the season on a high note with Joey McGuire. They win their final 4 games. They beat Oklahoma in that thriller on Thanksgiving weekend. They crush Mississippi in the bowl game. So there's a lot of positive mojo coming out of Lubbock. They bring back, I believe, all 11 starters on the offensive side. Now, Donovan Smith is gone, the more rush threat at quarterback, but Tyler Shuck is going to be the guy. So are you buying in on Texas Tech heading into 2023? Because it does feel like there's a lot of, like I said, positive momentum on the Red Raider side here.
Yeah, we were talking about, I do a little Big 12 podcast with a friend of mine, kind of a labor of love, and we're previewing Texas Tech this week actually on the show. And we were kind of thinking about like calling the tagline, what could possibly go wrong? Because it seems like this one's lined up, right? In terms of what you've seen the last couple of years of Baylor, Oklahoma State, TCU, kind of that in the vacuum of Oklahoma being elite, what does the Big 12 look like? Well, it looks like a bunch of programs who are generally similarly talented, similarly resourced, and one of them peaks at the right time and they get the bounces. Feels like Texas Tech is that guy this season. I'm a little bit wary of that. I think that we've seen them win some games that were a little crazy last year. And I think that they've have a nice schedule, frankly. Like you miss Oklahoma anytime, like that's great. And you get Texas in that weird game. But I think that one thing about returning production is like, if your guys are not that great, then returning production only matters in so much as it matters, right? And I don't mean to insult that. I think they've got some interesting guys, but last year their offense kind of felt like the island of misfit toys. They come out against TCU and run like 17 different run concepts because they're just playing junk ball offense, trying to make something happen. And I get that that's Kitley's MO. I think this is going to be a super high variance team. I think the defense loses, one of the best players in college football last year, Tyree Wilson, and is going to struggle to deal with that. The best thing I think I could say about them is that in the Oregon game, Oregon's defense is going to be bad enough that I think Texas Tech will score. And so they'll at least be exciting. Big red flag for me is Tyler Shuck. Like, he hasn't been able to stay healthy. And, I think every Tech fan on Twitter will say, hey, he's 8-1 or something when Tyler Shuck starts. And you're like, yeah, a lot of those games are, Murray State and games they were heavily favored in against teams they were obviously supposed to beat. So the wins and losses don't matter as too much to me. And more so, can they like form a cohesive offensive identity that works week to week and be able to kind of impose their will? Last year, I felt like they were doing a lot of taking what other teams give them, and not so much of taking, imposing their will and kind of running an offense. I had them in 83rd in EPA per play margin. That offense wasn't great, and that defense was just kind of okay in the offense in the 80s range and defense in the 30s range in terms of expected points added. So a team that, like, I think it's a fun idea in the Big 12 of this year when the development cycles hit. I don't know that we're going to see Texas Tech run off a 9-0 or 8-1 Big 12 championship run this season.
The 7 interests me, though. And like I said before, when Circa is at a different spot in some markets, that's where I get nervous, right? Because DraftKings has 7.5 and Circa has 7. Not to say that, you can't beat Circa. It's absolutely possible. But I'm looking at the schedule and I'm thinking, all right, they won 7 regular season games last year. Could they get back to that? At very least, do we get a push? Obviously, we're not making bets where we hope to get pushes, but the 7 is interesting. If the Wyoming game kind of freaks me out, but the more and more I talk to people, they kind of believe that just the gap is widening between the FCS and the the P5 and the G5. So at 7, is that something of interest?
Yeah, what I'm about to do is not a great way to think about this, but in absence of writing down the probabilities and doing a little math right here, but we're talking it
Parker. Yeah, we're just talking it
Look,
out.
I just don't want to say something and have someone come back and be like, hey, on this podcast you said. I was like, look, we're just talking about how we would think about this. And one, I will note, I meant to say this earlier, I think that I want to say out loud, Circa's great. They support the Sumer Show, and we're really happy to have them. And I think it's one of the sharper books, and I look at their lines whenever they come out. I think it's awesome. So totally agree. If I'm talking about Texas Tech and 7, I'm looking at, all right, let's count Wyoming. Let's count Tarleton State. We're 2-1, right? So yep. I need 6 conference games. Because we're playing that Big 12 schedule. You're looking at Texas Tech having to win 2 of at Baylor, at BYU, at Texas, and TCU at home. That's hard. Yep. I think that's hard to do.
Yep.
And if you look at the way they're look at the way their season breaks down. I just don't know. I like that TCU spot. I think it's great, but I don't think going to Kansas is the joke that it was. I don't think hosting UCF is the joke that it could have been with a G5 team. And I think they should be glad to have West Virginia on the road earlier in the season, because going to Morgantown is not guaranteed. And also West Virginia is a little bit in shambles. You get those early, maybe you can get rolling a little bit, but that's a rough stretch to go Kansas State at BYU, TCU at Kansas, UCF, Texas, back to back there. Especially with depth having been an issue before, I could see this being a rough spot for them.
Yeah. All right, let's get to TCU. Incredible season last year. Stunned Michigan in the semifinals. They get to the championship game. We know how that went all down, but all in all, just an incredible season for Sonny Dykes in year 1 at TCU. Max Duggan goes to New York City, everything. And now you enter year 2. I believe in totality, they have, I think you would know better than me, I think 3 starters coming back on the offensive side, but they hit the transfer portal. They got Trey Sanders. Chandler Morris was the day 1 starter in TCU before he got hurt. So they're certainly missing a lot of what they had from a year ago. Quentin Johnston's a first-round pick at wide receiver. Just a ton of production from the wide receiver position has gone. Johnston, Barber, Davis, all gone. The top 3 leading rushers are all gone. So, it seems like, I don't want to say rebuild because that's not true, but this is going to be a challenge to get back to where they were last year. So you got a win total sitting at 7.5, and you got some pretty lofty, odds for TCU to go and win the conference this year at 16-1. So what are you looking at TCU, who, bright lights week 1, they're a 21-point favorite against Colorado, but big noon kickoff's going to be in Fort Worth. All the eyeballs are going to be there because of Deion Sanders' debut as the head coach of Colorado. So what type of season should we expect from TCU after last year's magical run?
Yeah, I think I was on a podcast a couple weeks ago, and they were like, "What are your expectations for 2023?" And I just said, "Don't lose to Colorado, man. That's just don't botch that on week 1 in the prime time against prime time." Looking at TCU, 130th in returning production on offense. That's they're 100 and 40th on defense, so a little bit more cogent on the defense side of the ball, although they lose some of the top end there. That's 118th returning production overall. That doesn't mean everything, but again, I said it before and I'll say it again, the Big 12 matters in terms of development cycles, in terms of where your critical mass of talent is. I think that the Chandler Morris stuff has been I think that there's been a lot more separation between Chandler Morris and Max Duggan in retrospect than there was in reality. And I do think that Chandler Morris was the guy, but like we saw a half of Chandler Morris that looked very, very bad before he got injured against Colorado. We haven't really seen him play the requisite reps. Like Max Duggan got to play a ton of reps and work through being bad. Chandler Morris really hasn't gotten to do that yet. If you look at the offense, they're replacing Quentin Johnston. Savion Williams is a big body, a dude that looks like he could be pretty good in the offense. They bring in transfer John Paul Richardson from Oklahoma State, which is not a drop down, which is what I'll talk about in a second, but is a lateral move, a guy who just as the first option in Oklahoma State's offense had a really, really low ceiling, but coming in could be kind of that gadget player, could be that Darius Davis, Tay Barber kind of where is he on the field, and give that offense some quick reps for Chandler Morris. The problem is going to be the offensive line. You lose Steve Avila, you lose Alana Lee, a transfer who came in and filled a very specific gap. Their development cycle, their whole pipeline on offensive line has been messed up for so many years that it's just hard overnight to fix that. And I think if you just looked at recruiting rankings or transfer, you're like, hey, they brought in Tommy Brockemeyer from Alabama and former 5-star, and I would say, hey, I think there's a reason that guy transferred from Alabama. And same thing for they bring in JoJo Earl. So I think that Sonny Dykes made this team work last year with transfers that moved up a level, and now is trying to do it with transfers that moved down a level, and that's a little bit of a red flag to me. I expect TCU to take a step back. I think that Sonny Dykes has shown us that when he has the ideal circumstances, he can take a roster to the very top. The question remains, what's the floor? Can he rebuild this roster? They have a pretty easy non-con, but they do have a brutal stretch after the bye. So first time I think in since the Big 12 started that TCU hasn't had a bye in like week 2. So they get a bye on October 28th, but then they go to Texas Tech on Thursday. They have Texas, they have Baylor, they have at Oklahoma leading up. That's a pretty rough straight slate of 4 there. Not to mention they go to Kansas State this year. A team that games were just back and forth last season, and so I think TCU's issue is going to be down the stretch. They're just going to be not a lot of good spots for them to beat the teams that they won't be favored against. 7 feels very comfortable in terms of what the floor is, and I would be so tempted by an under, but with these new teams coming in, TCU gets a Houston, they get a BYU. I think that they could hit 8 just as easily. So that 7.5 is rough. I was kind of expecting to see a 6.5 from this number, but yeah, it being at 7.5, I think is a really good line and really speaks less to the program of TCU and more so how you believe in kind of the cyclical nature of Big 12 success.
Yeah, and it's looking at the schedule and doing the win-loss game is always a risky proposition.
Yeah.
Especially in this conference, right? I mean, this conference has kind of made its bread on just eating itself every year. But I think as of right now, they will be a favorite in their first 7 games. And then they might be an underdog in their last 5. Now, maybe home to Baylor, they'll be a favorite November 18th. But, I mean, if you played under or over 7.5, you could be sweating out that over, that under, by the BYU game saying, oh, my God, this team's 7-0. We're screwed. And then if you even had the over, you might be like, all right, we're 7-0, but we might not be a favorite the remainder of the way out. So, yeah, it is. I do expect to step back. If you played the under, you you'd really feel pretty good if West Virginia, Iowa State, BYU, somebody could just pick them off, and then you'd be heading into Kansas State with a little more wiggle room.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think that's, and again, we don't have to say that again, but like you be careful about the win and loss game. But like looking at the break of this and looking how backloaded these last 5 games are, I think you're in a position after BYU to not know any more about whether the over is going to hit than you would have been, at the start of the season, which is always a little bit worrisome. I think that especially like looking at TCU and kind of looking at their season last year, a lot of Big 12 teams had very close margins and kind of went the other way. I think Iowa State, all of their games except one were one-score losses, all their losses rather. And I think that Baylor was still pretty negative in one-score losses. And so you expect some like positive regression from other teams. That coupled with TCU did get some really good fortunate circumstances last year. I don't think they're a value bet for sneaking into the Big 12 title and then, potentially hedging, buying back, whatever. And again, given that slate, I don't even know if there's a strong lean towards over or under on this side, just because you're going to need to know so much about those last 5 games to make any kind of decision.
Yeah, that TCU Baylor game last year was something. I had Baylor, I think, plus, God, was it 2 or 3? So I was at least happy there, but it was one of those situations, kind of like USC with all their positive turnovers. I'm like, at some point, someone's going to get TCU.
Yeah.
And no, they kept figuring it out, at least during the regular season. Speaking of Baylor, 6-6 last year. They lost their bowl game. Anytime you play an armed service team in the bowl, you're going to lose, or it's going to be close. And that's what happened last year.
Winter storm warning, a really good armed forces team. And you're playing in your rival stadium, like nobody on Baylor's sideline wanted to be there, right? Like you can't. They got whooped, and you can't blame them. Like that was just terrible. Yeah, that was just a terrible situation.
It is handicapping 101 when you look at the bowl season. You're like, all right, who's playing a military school? Oh, they don't want to be there. Pre-Christmas, 6-6 year after they won the Big 12. Yeah, they're not going to be happy about being in this bowl game. But do we get the bounce back here from Baylor? 6-6 last year in the regular season, 6-7 overall. Non-con, they got to play Utah, and that'll be an interesting one. They get Utah to come to Waco. Utah will be coming off of a pretty high-profile Week 1 game against Florida. So Utah certainly testing themselves in the non-conference here. Goes Texas State, new head coach, Utah, Long Island, and then Texas at home September 23rd, which I imagine will be an emotionally charged crowd. And, I always look for tricky spots, Parker. Man, after you play Texas at home, you got to go to UCF. That's kind of not a great scheduling spot there for the Baylor Bears. No Oklahoma on the schedule, at Kansas State, at TCU, and West Virginia, Iowa State coming to Waco. So you're looking at a win total right now, 7 at Circa, 7.5 at DraftKings. Blake Shapen is back, so that's positive there for the Bears. But it's been a roller coaster ride for this program. Going back to the last year of Matt Rule, right? 11-3, then year 1, the COVID season, 2-7. Then they win the conference, 12-2. Last year they go 6-7. So does this roller coaster take a dip back up with Baylor in 2023?
Yeah, I like this. Sorry, did you say the line was 7 or 7.5?
7 at Circa, 7.5 at DraftKings.
Yeah. Okay. I honestly like an over here, even if I think that their ceiling's a little bit low. You can look at the schedule, and I have Texas State, LIU, Cincy, Iowa State, Houston, and West Virginia should all be pretty good wins. Looking at the away home road, I think that the consistency with keeping Shape in there is good. He wasn't awful last year. I think their defense had some issues. But again, it was kind of like 2022, they lost all of their skill positions. I think they lost 75% of their production from 2021, not quarterback, not even counting that they were going to, made the choice to switch to Shapen from Bohannon in the offseason. But they kept their offensive line. So that gave that offense a lot higher of a floor last season. At times you could tell they really didn't have the guys. There's a couple games where like Gavin Holmes dropped a pass that if they'd have caught it, they would have won those games. And so it's hard. They had low margins, but I think they had a really high floor because of that offensive line. Now this season, again, we're getting the perverse kind of pendulum swing back where they have all these skill guys. They have some really good skill guys on this offense. They're going to turn over like 4 guys on the offensive line. And so they're a little bit out of sync there in terms of where their experience and their talent is going to be. And so that's a little rough, but I think Shapen should be better with time. And again, think he was plenty fine for any kind of offense you want to run. I like Dave Aranda's adaptability. I think this is the year we learn about the Aranda experiment. Is the Aranda experiment that he can generally hit, 6 and 7 wins for a couple seasons and then pounce when the Big 12's down and get into that championship game? Or is this, is he going to be able to turn them into contender when people don't expect? I think I like the over on 7. I think eight or 9 wins this season is very, very likely. Even if they are kind of uninspiring at the top, I like the schedule. And I mean, they could lose to, 8 wins is losing to Utah, losing to Texas, losing to Texas Tech, losing to Kansas State, winning the rest of those games. I feel very comfortable about what an 8-4 would look like. So I think Baylor over is something I'm interested here if you can get it at that 7 or 7.5.
Yeah, 7.5 right now at Circa on Baylor. So a team that went over, I want to say by week 3, I think they were the first team in college football to go over last year, was the Kansas Jayhawks. And then as the season started, Parker, we got to the point, we were just talking about TCU's schedule and how it was backloaded. We sat there and we said, okay, they just beat Iowa State. They're sitting at 5-0. Are they going to get to a bowl game? Because it isn't going to be easy. And ultimately, there was a spot where situationally, it was one of my favorite bets, I think, of the season when they had Oklahoma State coming in at home after back-to-back, 3 straight really tough losses for Kansas. And they got that win against the Pokes and ultimately made the bowl game. It was a thriller against Arkansas, overtime, and they lost, but they, a hell of a game. Now they bring back everybody, not everybody, but a lot of pieces, right? They bring back Jalen Daniels. They bring back all their, leading rushers. A lot of pieces are coming back, but the worry I have about Kansas is this is a team. We talked about this with your colleague Eric Eager regarding the Washington Commanders, a couple years ago, where it was, one year their win total was super low. They went over, they won the conference, they won the division, and then everybody was in love with Washington, and we pounded the under. So I'm looking at Kansas. I love Lance Leipold. I want Kansas to be good, Parker, but this was a team that had a win total of 2 last year. A lot of close wins early on in the year, and now their win total at DraftKings is sitting at 6.5. They don't get the fortune of missing one of the big boys. They play both Texas and Oklahoma. Granted, Oklahoma's coming off of a bye. I'm a bit worried about Kansas here, especially if heck, we could play under 6.5 and that could come home. So I'm pulling for Kansas, but I'm a bit worried that, maybe there's just been too much movement from a year ago.
This is tugging at my heartstrings because I hate this because I was on Kansas over and I think that they were really fun, but I do think it's really important to acknowledge that they got the walking wounded in Oklahoma State in that game to get to a bowl last year. And they were effectively uncompetitive outside of that down the stretch. So it's a fun story. I think that's great proof of concept for Leipold. I'm long on him. And it seems like Kansas is going to invest around him. So it absolutely could build up that program. I think that the transition from the basement to middle class is absolutely on the table for Kansas. And I think a couple years ago we were talking about Kansas don't be a meme. Like if Kansas beats someone, it has been a meme historically. That's no longer true. They're like a real football team. So I think that's good. The big issue for me here from a football sense, man, this defensive line might be the worst unit in the Big 12. Not the worst defensive line unit in the Big 12, not just that. I'm talking about the worst of any kind of unit, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, offensive line, whatever. Like it's really rough. They lose a couple NFL guys. They just don't have the talent to fill that in. That's going to come way back. And it's not like their secondary was amazing last year. Now you lose any kind of front pressure disruption that you have on that opposing offense. And man, it is going to be really rough. I don't know that defense is really going to be able to put up a front. And you couple that with Jalen Daniels is so fun. I love they've played Jason Bean at running back in spring football, and they kind of like were messing around with how to make him involved because he can sling it as well and had some good performances last year. There's tape on the offense, man. I think that people are going to do their homework. I think that people are going to prepare for Kansas more than a glorified bye this year, and there is going to be some of that effect as well. So I think Kansas is a fun story. Them winning 4 or 5 games this year does not mean that Leipold's a failure. It doesn't mean that last year was a fluke as to what the program could be. But I think we're talking about success. We've got a Kansas adjust. The talent level is just not there. The depth on defense is still not there. I'm under on Kansas this year. I think the hype train's out of control.
Yeah, 6.5. I mean, heck, they could make a bowl game and we'd still win our bet. Think about that phrase we just uttered. They could make a bowl game and we could still win our bet.
You're telling me that I could watch on TV and root with Kansas, celebrate with them as they made a bowl, and still cash my under. Like I'm all in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
6.5 there on Kansas at DraftKings. So certainly something that I think might be worth a look. A couple other 6.5s, Parker, and then we'll kind of speed through. We'll go speed round on the remaining teams here. UCF and Oklahoma State. We'll start with the Pokes. Doubting, Mike Gundy led squad is usually not a profitable endeavor. Year after year, he figures out ways to get this team to 7 wins. I mean, heck, look at and now I'm doing the bowl game kind of math off the top of my head. But if you look at since 2013, 10, 7, 10, 10, 10, 7, 8, 8, 12, 7. And last year they lost their bowl game. So you got a win total sitting at 6.5. But, is it finally catching up to them? Spencer Sanders is gone. They dealt with, as you alluded to, when they played Kansas. I mean, they were just so beat up last year. And you saw it at the end of the season as it felt like things were kind of coming off the rails. They got embarrassed by Kansas State. Basically, after the Texas game, it was kind of all downhill after that.
The TCU game is where Spencer Sanders sustained that injury, played okay versus Texas, and Texas laid an egg.
That was like,
and then Oklahoma
turnovers.
State just didn't have anything going down the stretch. I think we underestimate how bad Iowa State was last year. That Oklahoma State was able to pull that off. But man, that's 1-6 down the stretch after the Texas game.
Yep.
1-5, and just dismal the entire way down.
And the bowl game was a joke. I mean, they got embarrassed by Wisconsin. I think they scored.
Well, I don't think I could have told you 11 starters on either side of the ball for either team for the Wisconsin game. That was absurd.
Luke Fickell was coaching. I'm like, he just took the job. I'm like, what is happening here? So Oklahoma State, is this, we always like sell high, buy low. We just talked about a sell high on Kansas. Is this a buy low potential on Oklahoma State at 6.5 wins?
I'm tempted. I think so. I think that you give Gundy the track record here. I have to remind myself of this in terms of, returning production and fit and recruiting rankings. Oklahoma State's not doing the same math as everyone else. Mike Gundy likes to see a guy that everyone rates a 3-star and say, yep, that's going to be the guy that I can turn into, the foundation of our offense. So some of the concerns about recruiting and returning production, I think, are tough. Alan Bowman evidently looks awesome and just looks like the timing is really there, which is an issue he's had and an issue Oklahoma State had at times last year. So it looks like they're really gelling. Again, you talk about last stretches here. They get to end the season at West Virginia, Cincinnati, Oklahoma sandwich in there, but then at UCF, at Houston, BYU. Those are 5 extremely winnable games to end the season there, and nothing that would kind of constitute a body blow back-to-back kind of a deal. I think that Oklahoma State can absolutely right the ship and say, hey, we have defined the upper middle class of the Big 12 for the last couple of years, and every year we do it when someone's doubting us. So the turnover is a little bit worrisome, but I mentioned John Paul Richardson earlier. He wasn't fitting well. It's not like they said, oh, we had these good guys and we lost them. It was more so of Mike Gundy saying, I don't like how this is going. So I think they'll regress positively. I think an over would be appropriate here. I don't think I would put any money on them making it back to Arlington. But I do like an over here.
All right. Last one of the teams who have an over-under that would get them to an above 500 record, and that's UCF. They have the highest over-under win total of any of the newbies. We'll get to, BYU and Cincinnati and Houston here momentarily, but UCF's an interesting one, right? Because they've got talent. They've recruited well, and they've been a team that obviously during the Scott Frost era was phenomenal. The Josh Heupel era I thought was kind of trending downwards. Heupel leaves, which I thought, there's a tweet out there saying that there was an upgraded coach. That might have been a bad take by me when they brought in Gus Malzahn, but they've gone 9-4, 9-5. They lost the AAC championship last year in a rematch with Tulane. They bring back a bunch of talent. This is the team that intrigues me, maybe not the most, but I'm fascinated by this team, Parker, heading into the Big 12. They do have 5 road games in Big 12 play. Don't get Texas, which is always a positive considering they're the best team in the conference. Non-con game at Boise State week 2, which will be a bear of travel there for the Knights. So what are you expecting from UCF in year 1 of the Big 12?
Yeah, spicy for them, and spicy that they get that at Boise State, then FCS, then at Kansas State is a rude welcome to the Big 12 there, having to go into conference play to Kansas State. I think that a lot of UCF fans were convinced that Josh Heupel couldn't recruit, and then he goes to Tennessee and can clearly recruit. He just needed some of the resources. And so maybe UCF has gotten a little bit in line in terms of what it takes to recruit. I think Gus is doing a good job kind of with some transfers, getting some guys in there. Last year, John Reese Plumlee gets hurt. They beat Tulane, but then they can't win the rematch. Like a fine season from them. And I think the vision's there of them being a good spread team that can kind of be feisty. But again, they are jumping up. They are going to have to play a harder schedule. They do get a couple rough road games at Kansas, at Oklahoma, at Texas Tech. But at Cincinnati, I think I don't even know if we need to cover them at the end for how many times I've said that's an easy game for an opponent to win. But so I think that if you're betting this and you're looking at the distribution of possible outcomes, 8 wins is so far to the right of where the mean of this distribution is that an over 6.5 here makes me a little bit nervous just because of the slate they have to play down the stretch and the fact that they look so bad when John Reese Plumlee went out and Mike Keene wasn't really the guy. Plus, they've got a tough Boise State game. I don't think that they would be. I don't think that they might be a small favorite if they're a favorite at all in that game. I think that should be within a field goal either direction. But that tough non-con game plus a pretty rough start of just Kansas and Baylor back to back even is tough. I think that I would, if gun to my head and I had to, I'd be inclined towards the other just because I feel like the distribution is skewed in such a way with them having to jump up and the talent level getting better, but not anywhere near where it needs to be to compete in this conference.
All right, let's do speed round. We don't have to go too in depth because we've been going long here, so I don't want to keep you all day. But BYU kind of intrigues me. They lost a lot. They lost Puka Nacua, one of their top wide receivers. Romney was just never healthy last year. Obviously, Jaron Hall is gone, but believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, Keaton Slovis is still playing college football, and he will be their quarterback in 2023. Can he get back to what we saw at USC as opposed to Pitt? They bring in Aiden Robbins from UNLV, a guy who's got some excitement there. So their win total sitting at 5.5. BYU, they do get Texas, they both get Oklahoma. Their schedule is not easy, especially if you include a non-con visit to Fayetteville. And Woo Pig Sooie beat them up pretty good last year up in Provo. So what's your expectations on BYU in year 1?
Yeah, I think we're looking at missing a bowl for BYU. I think that their defense is it's been so bad for so many years, like 3 years in a row now. We thought, can the defense get worse? And it can always get worse in college football. They make a switch and bring in FCS. Oh my gosh, I'm not going to get his name. Weber State head coach is coming in as the defensive guy.
Just say Weber State head coach. It's fine.
They're switching to a three down from a 4 down. They have some returning guys at the linebacker position, at the defensive back position, and a transfer up that I think are going to be interesting. But so maybe they'll regress the mean a little bit on defense. Maybe they can get things right. You look at some of the comments the new defensive coordinator has said, and they do kind of sound a lot like, hey, we just don't have the athletes that I need right now. So yeah. I think there's already some tempering of expectations about the defense, which is never a good look. Aiden Robbins, 1,000-yard rusher at UNLV. He had BYU only had 36 total targets to a running back last year, and Aiden Robbins had 28 by himself. So like with Keaton Slovis, with their wide receiver room being a little thin, maybe that is a fun outlet for Slovis and can help them be productive. One thing that makes me very worried about this offense and why I think they're going to be under, Jaron Hall last season ran so much. I'm trying to read this out of my line of notes. Sorry. Jaron Hall ran 54 times. A lot of their offense was predicated on rushing against really bad teams. I think if you look at the teams that they played in the run game last year and why their run game looked so good, it's like Arkansas was 112th in rushing efficiency, Wyoming 117th, Notre Dame 103rd, USF 130, Baylor 95th, Utah State 113th, Oregon 92nd. Are you sensing a theme about the run defenses that they played last year? So they had Jaron Hall, awesome mobile quarterback. They go to Keaton Slovis, who many things you can say about him, but awesome mobile quarterback is not one of them. I'm worried about the ceiling on the offense coming way down and the floor on the defense not being that much higher. I think that we're in for a rough season in Provo.
All right, we'll do. We got 5 teams left. We don't have to hit on them all, but
you said speed run, and I went on a monologue.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. You're the one that I'm taking your time. But you mentioned Cincinnati a bunch. I just want to hit them. 5.5. They bring back very little returning starters. New head coach. It feels like a big changeover. They've got a road game in the non-con at Pitt. They don't play Texas. They got Oklahoma at home. Their win total's at 5.5. So I'm just kind of putting the tea leaves together. Do you think now they get the majority of the newbies? They get BYU, they get UCF, they get Houston. So that's a benefit. They got West Virginia, which isn't a bear of a travel for them. So the schedule it seems daunting, but do they have enough talent? That's the question.
Frankly, no. I don't think they do. I think that they made a pretty uninspired hire here and aren't in a good position to compete immediately in the Big 12, and frankly are 3 to 4 years behind from how they've built this team. With quarterback situation isn't great. Like last year, you watched them play Arkansas and thought maybe if they'd hit some of those open guys, they could have actually won that Arkansas game. Talent turnover is big. I don't think they have a coaching advantage. I'm really low on this team for a couple years until they figure out what they're going to do next, frankly.
And then of the final 4, Iowa State, West Virginia, Cincinnati, Houston, actually final 3. We've hit on almost all of them. Of those 3, of that beautiful trio, anything in your eyes, either positive or negative, that people are kind of overlooking? If we do a Cliff Notes version on those 3.
I don't want to break news, but it sounds like Iowa State's quarterback room is going to be vastly different than what we thought it was going to be even in spring practice because of some stuff. So I'm very much on an under on Iowa State as kind of the end there. They have a pretty low ceiling on offense, even if the defense should be good. And so that's another play that I've that I think is really, really good. Overall, you look at Houston, Donovan Smith is interesting with Dana Holgorsen, and I think Donovan Smith's a very fun quarterback if you design an offense for him. Their defense under Doug Belk, I was really high on him. I felt like he stayed at Houston one season too long, kind of turned over. But Donovan Smith and Matthew Golden as a duo for Houston is probably one of the cooler, just in terms of like the plays might look cool, even if they're not consistent, wide receiver quarterback pairing. So I think they have a high ceiling on offense. But again, I don't know about how deep that defense is going to be.
Parker, great stuff, man. We appreciate it. You do great work at StatsOWar on Twitter. Sumer Sports, Monday and Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern. And then once college football gets closer, the BetUS College Football Show. Parker, great stuff, man. Really appreciate the insight.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Love talking about it. Sorry, I tend to go long-winded.
There is no apologies needed from you. I always feel bad keeping people as long as I do, but much appreciated. Great stuff, and let's cash some tickets.
Yes, sir. Best of luck.
And thanks so much to Parker Fleming. Great stuff from him, breaking down the Big 12. A little sell high on Kansas. Not very enthused about Cincinnati. Oklahoma State, maybe a buy low opportunity. Baylor, a buy low opportunity. And I think that's everybody who's come on the podcast has said Texas this year would be pretty surprising if they don't win the Big 12, plus money available on them to win the Big 12. And I thought Parker, it was a good way to look at it. Rather go win the Big 12 route as opposed to over 9.5 wins. So really great stuff from Parker. Make sure to check him out on Sumer Sports and also BetUS college football. Please rate, review, and subscribe, as I always say. Let's keep the momentum going as we head closer and closer to the college football season. Another Power 5 conference to break down next week. I would tell you what it is, but I don't have the answer yet for you. But stay tuned to @1TimMurray. I will let you know who that guest will be and what that conference will be. But that's going to do it. Thanks to Parker. Thanks to Steven, the producer of this podcast. I am Tim Murray. We'll talk to you next week on the VSiN College Football Betting Podcast.
Unplug your cleaning routine with the Ryobi 18 Vault One Plus cordless cleaning lineup. From tackling bathroom tile with the soap dispensing telescoping power scrubber, to cleaning wet and dry messes with the 2-in-1 Wet Dry Swift Clean Stick Vacuum, to cleaning up pet hair and debris with our advanced stick vacuum, Ryobi has a solution for every cleaning task. And because one battery powers over 300 products, you have the power to do more. Visit ryobitools.com to learn more. Sold exclusively at the Home Depot.